There's nothing wrong with you if you have reached the point where it's just so tough thinking about going on a diet, and this makes you feel almost like strangled and paralyzed with fear all at the same time. Because no one would indulge in something where they have only experienced failing. Hi, Camilla here. Before we dive into the podcast, just a quick note to personally invite you to come and check out my free training on how to finally end weight loss struggles, binge and emotional eating, and feeling like a failure once and for all. Over the years, my work has grown into a world-changing riot where we reframe how we see ourselves as a failure for trying to play the game of the diet culture. It's time to break free from being the good girl, the weight loss struggles, binge and emotional eating, impossible aesthetic ideals, negative body image, self-sabotaging patterns, never feeling good enough, and often feeling like a failure. It's time to create a new paradigm where we enjoy a diet-free, binge-free, stress-free, slower, and more intentional and joyful way of life while you feel good about yourself and your body along the way.
This is so true. I think that anyone that has struggles with food, body, and challenges with eating should have Camilla's program on prescription.
You know, after the first evening listening to Camilla's lectures, I understood why I was always failing my diets. It completely shocked me how accurately she could describe everything that I had been struggling with.
Check out the free training at camillasage.com. Now, let's go into the Diet Riot. Hey, it's Camilla, and welcome to the Diet Riot. This is a podcast where I am on a mission to help women escape from food struggles, the diet culture, and the hustle-focused society so they can finally be free to enjoy their bodies and their lives on their own terms. I'm so glad that you're here with me today. So today's topic is actually the diet culture. We need to talk about this, and it is the third part of the problem we have been addressing up until this point in this season of the podcast. Because as soon as you're trapped into the illusions of the first two and conditioned into being a human doing and being a good girl and thinking that you need to look like whatever social ideal to be worthy of acceptance and belonging, as soon as you're sucked into that scam and open your own mind for something potentially being considered quote unquote wrong with your own body, and that you need to change it through diet and exercise, then the diet culture is ready with a solution up front. I don't know how many million results you get if you actually just Google the word diet, but it's insane. So it's time for us to really tap into the diet riot and call out this bullshit for what it is. But to actually understand why the diet culture and the diet and fitness industry is the villain here, we need to take a step back and dive into the binge eating model, as well as looking at how our brain works. Because we need to have an understanding about these things to actually understand why the approaches you have been trying up until this point, the approaches that is sold for billions of dollars in the weight loss and fitness industry, aren't psychologically made for you to succeed in weight loss. I know it's shocking, right? But this is true. And in the meantime, these industries are earning billions of dollars and the money is pouring in because every time a woman buys into the scam and believing they first of all need to turn to the diet and fitness industry to find a solution to their quote unquote problem, and then they aren't able to stay quote unquote on track long enough to reach their goal, and then they fall off, and then they immediately think it must be me who's the problem, not the solution, not the diet, not the whatever plan they have turned to. It has to be themselves. And then they go back for another solution, thinking I need to find something that works for me since I'm the problem to begin with. But nothing could be further from the truth. So to really kick this off, we need to start talking about the brain and the binge eating model. And stay tuned, because what you will hear in this podcast episode, you have never heard anywhere else before, and it's literally going to change your whole view on dieting and the weight loss industry once and for all. So let's start talking about the binge eating model. Because in general, binge eating, overeating, emotional eating, snacking, or whatever you call it, is actually often caused by wanting to change how you feel. And anyone, we are human beings, so at times we feel less pleasant emotions, and sometimes they can be kind of very neutral as well, like just being bored. However, very often we sit with feelings such as frustration, anger, sadness, inadequacy, boredom, stress, overwhelm, loneliness, despair, frustration, hopelessness, etc. And the thing is that this is very often a starting point for turning to food and developing issues with food and your eating. Because our brain works by having established neural pathways in our brain. So you can literally look at it like roads. For every thought we have, for every habit, for every behavior, for every skill, we have these roads, we have these tracks as neural pathways. So the brain knows where to go, and this is actually in control of everything we're doing. For example, we're driving a car and we don't even need to think about driving, and all of a sudden you've been driving for 10 minutes and you have no idea what you've been doing in the meantime because your head has been somewhere completely else. And the thing is that when we look at these connections in the brain, these neural pathways, they are literally the responses to the outside world as well as everything that's going on inside of us. So these neural pathways are in control of how we think, how we act, both consciously and subconsciously. And when some kind of stimuli or thought comes in, the brain responds to it like it is used to, It chooses the path of least resistance. And this is why habits are so established and automatic in us, and it can be so hard to change a habit or create a new habit or new behaviors and getting rid of the old ones, because it's very difficult and also uncomfortable to break out of the normal neural pathways we're used to using. We're feeling safe when we're using them, and it's like no effort at all. But to actually step outside of our comfort zone and doing things in a different way, that costs a lot and it's really uncomfortable. So the first time you turned to food as a regulatory mechanism to change how you feel, a new neural pathway was actually built. Because every human being on this planet has at some point in their life turned to food to feel better or to get comfort or to get some kind of satisfaction or pleasure. But what is it that actually defines if this is a problem with eating or not? The answer to this question is if you are in control of it and you can steer your behavior. So of course, we all love to eat. It's amazing to eat really delicious things. I'm a foodie myself. However, can I choose, when I'm looking at my life and my own personal health and goals, etc., can I choose to give in to this treat I'm offered? Let's say someone offered me chocolate cake. Can I then choose to do it or not? And if I choose to not indulge, can I then just let it go and continue just completely unaffected in my day? Because if that isn't the case, if we are stuck in this, oh my God, there's chocolate in the lunchroom. Oh, don't think about the chocolate. I can't. Stay away. And then eventually we slip up. Then we are not in control of our own behavior. And that is when this is actually a very huge problem for very many people. So when we look at these connections in the brain and how we have turned to food to find some kind of coping, to regulate how we feel, a new neural pathway is created. And with that, very often, if we end up repeating these behavior to the level it becomes a competence in our brain, at the level like if we're driving the car and aren't thinking about the fact that we're actually driving, we're just doing it very standardly, but our thoughts is elsewhere. The same applies to the eating. It's the same principle psychologically, such as if we're thinking normal thoughts or if you're brushing your teeth or whatever habits and emotional habits you have. And The thing is that people can have very many different methods of how to regulate how they feel if they feel unpleasant emotions. It can be shopping, it can be food, gambling, smoking, other kinds of tobacco, narcotics, pills, social media, scrolling, TV, Netflix, movies, porn, etc. All of these can be used and create some kind of addiction as a result of using it as the regulation mechanisms in yourself, and at the same time managing to change how you feel, or like managing to get a break or just to cope. And in this, a new neural pathway is actually created. So the reason why these habits are established in us in this way has to do with how our brain is put together. Because when we are talking about the brain in this matter, we need to divide it into two different parts. It actually consists of way more parts, but we're not going into the anatomy here. We're just using this divination to really understand what is going on here. So the brain consists of two basic parts, where we have one part of the brain which is conscious, and that part is 2.5 million years old. And then we have our survival brain, and that part is actually 250 million years old. So it's very huge differences on these two parts of our brain. And our conscious brain stands for our intellectual thinking. So every kind of logic, reasoning, or analysis you do in your life, that is a language that part of the brain understands. However, our survival brain does not understand this kind of communication via intellectual thinking, but that navigates from purely feelings, emotions, and associations. And that is why someone can observe that they're actually turning to food and they know they quote unquote shouldn't, but they can't do anything about it because this part of the brain that is in control of the behavior, which is the subconscious part of the brain, the survival brain, don't understand logic thinking. Like, I know I shouldn't eat this, but I still can't resist. So when it comes to the way our brain works, it's very positive that our survival brain works in this way, because when it comes to our survival, if you're all of a sudden out in the street standing in front of a speeding bus coming straight at you, you really want to react super quick and get out of the way as soon as possible. And this is what our survival brain does for us by analyzing what to do and what specific action it needs to take based on the emotions of the situation. And this happens so quickly that you barely have time to register the threat of the bus with an intellectual thought in the intellectual part of the brain before you have already gotten out of the way. So basically what happens here is when you get scared, our survival brain reacts instantly to the feeling as our life is really severely and like being threatened, and then it creates an action before we have time to process what is happening in our analytical part of the brain. But the crux of this problem is that our survival brain cannot distinguish between an external physical threat to our survival, or if it's quote unquote only a negative emotion on the inside of ourselves that it perceives as a threat. So there you have a very big problem in all of this when it comes to food. Because in general, negative emotions inside of us creates the same responses in the survival brain as an actual physical threat outside of us. And when you feel negative emotions and when you then turn to food as a way to feel better, even if it's just like from really shitty to a bit less shitty in 5 milliseconds, the survival brain will register this. And if we do this enough times to regulate our emotions, the survival brain will conclude that negative feeling, aka a threat for your survival, plus food equal survival, because the emotions disappear because we feel better there and then when we eat. And this is how these powerful, very deep and strong neural pathways are created. And the stronger and more intense the emotions that are involved are, the stronger the neurological connections in the survival brain will become. And this is why it will do everything it can to maintain its habit to ensure your survival. And this is also why you feel like when you really need to turn to food, it's actually the survival brain that screams at you. And most of the methods people are using to try to quote unquote fix this problem actually only makes it worse and reinforce the habits, because logical reasoning doesn't work here. Willpower also makes it worse because it is based on what you don't want rather than what you want. And I will return to the specific mechanisms here another time, but you need to remember that willpower as a primary driving force in a process that is trying to make you lose weight is like a pressure boiler, and at some point it boils over. If you have already ended up with these neurological patterns in your brain, another diet will never help you. It will only add to the neurological pathways you don't want to have. Like when you're having the fuck it moments and when you're like slipping up and you throw the baby out with the bathwater and call it a bad day or a bad week or a bad month and so on. And the actual solution to break free from these things is to rewire the habit and eliminate the cravings that leads to binge and emotional eating. So we have to re-educate the survival brain using a language it understands with techniques that lets you come into the neural pathway and get the connection so you can actually change it. And this is through a very structured process where we are using emotions as the language, emotions and associations and pattern recognition to actually change the habit. But no one in the diet and fitness industry is talking about the psychological effects of diets, and no one offers the whole solution that really puts out the problem and like really pulls it out by its roots, as well as offering a solution that includes the psychology of how we need to approach things. And the diet and fitness industry have created a perfect environment for people to create struggles with food, yo-yo dieting, overeating, binge eating, and emotional eating, because everyone can manage to stay on track for a period of time. And if you actually reach the finish line, it usually backfires with oh, now I can eat what I want, or you haven't made any actual changes in the diet you had that led you to the place you were when you started the journey. And then we very quickly end up gaining everything back on. And there's also a very distinct psychological impact of dieting. Very many people will actually call it advantages, like it's a plus to have diet rules. And they think the benefits there is because they don't need to think about what they should eat or shouldn't eat, thinking about the total of the day, or even just calculating their food or whatever themselves. They consider this to be a super advantage, the fact that they don't need to do anything. However, this is actually the biggest disadvantage of all, because when we do that and we tap into that kind of solution with these diet rules and so on, it removes the need to think for yourself, and therefore it removes your trust in yourself and your own ability to make decisions. It also creates perfectionism and an all or nothing mentality, because either you are on track or you aren't, and then you can just let it go. It's a bad day and so on. And in this, we also get created yes and no foods, like foods are good and bad. And if we eat something that's on the no list, or if it's something with the numbers in your day that doesn't add up because of something happens, #life happens, you are a failure and the day is a failure. And then again, you can just call it a bad day. And as soon as we're going into the good day versus the bad day strategy, where we either follow the rules or we don't, then we end up having these full-blown binges, because that is the perfect excuse to cover up a binge. However, the guilt and shame comes after. And another problem with diets is that they create a feeling of being controlled, being very limited and missing out. And it leaves no room for error. And this leads us to a very important concept you've never heard about before. And that is what I call tightening of the rope. So imagine there's a plank on the ground It's 6 feet long, it's wide enough so there's space for both of your feet, and it's completely stable. And if I put $5,000 on the table in a bet with you, how confident are you that you will be able to walk from one end to the other without falling off? You're pretty confident in that, right? And you would probably take that bet. However, what if I now say it's the exact same plank, it's exactly the same length, it's exactly the same width, and it's 100% solid and supported. However, now it lies between two very high skyscrapers. And the challenge is that you have to walk from one end of the plank to the other at the same bet. So, how confident are you now in the fact that you can actually do it, that you can walk over this plank without any problem? And are you willing to take the same bet? Most people wouldn't do this. And the reason for this is that all of a sudden, it feels like you have no room for error because of the pressure of getting it right and the brutally fatal consequences if you mess up. And this is because of the level of rigidity with no room for error really is stealing away your focus. Because now what you're going to focus on when you're moving across the plank is literally, oh my God, don't look down, don't fall. What if I fall? Oh my God, am I out of balance? What if I fall off now? Whoa! And then we freak out. So instead of focusing on the fact that you're really sure you can do this and you just lift your eyes and look at where you're going, you are so focused on failure and the potential catastrophic outcomes if you fail and fall off with endless what if questions. So now you only focus on what you don't want, and as a result, your anxiety levels and fear are so amplified to the point where you feel totally paralyzed and you feel you can't do it. But the task is technically just as simple as the first time when it was on the ground. And this is also what seems to happen psychologically when someone starts a new diet. And the level of rigidity, control, and precision becomes extremely high in connection to that specific diet. So the don't look down, don't fall transfers to don't think about chocolate, don't lose control. What if I break my diet? Oh my God. Don't think about chocolate. Oh my God, there it is again. And so on. And all of this fear and anxiety around food is amplified to the level where you all of a sudden feel you have literally painted yourself into a corner, unable to move with no space for errors. However, it all often starts easily when we're starting a new diet. But then this fear and anxiety for falling off the wagon and failing gradually builds up and sneaks up from behind. And very many tends to get super excited when they're starting a new diet. It's like they have finally found a diet that will work for them, the answer to all their struggles, the holy grail of all diets. But after a while, the level of rigidity, the rules, the extreme control, and the perfectionism that is needed to actually do this creates very much internal pressure that in turn creates these conscious cravings because we are focusing on don't slip up, don't think about the chocolate. But your brain doesn't know how to not to do anything. And we get both conscious cravings because we want what we can't have, as well as these subconscious cravings because we are suffering here, we're struggling, it's so hard, it's misery to be on a diet and like having to suffer all the way to we reach our goals. So the subconscious brain kicks in with cravings as well because it literally feels like our survival is threatened from all of these negative emotions and all the struggle. And this is when it's like a cookie monster that takes over as soon as you get a taste of something or as soon as you drop your defenses of willpower for a millisecond. And you can observe yourself thinking, oh, I'll just have one bite. And then all of a sudden it ends up in you eating like there's no tomorrow. And you're trying to satisfy all future craving as well, all at the same time. And as I mentioned earlier, the bad day strategy is a perfect strategy to justify a binge. I've already ruined my day today, so what's the freaking point? But the guilt and shame and bad consciousness comes after. The process of counting calories as a long-term strategy to stay on track or moderate your eating behavior actually creates the same psychological effects. It creates perfectionism and neuroticism with no room for error and the constant fear of losing control and not hitting your numbers. And the numbers become a pain and a stress, and you avoid and fear social events where you cannot weigh the food or track properly. And if you actually go, it very quickly ends up in an all or nothing mindset and having a quote unquote bad day. So you have the perfect excuse to overindulge and go into a binge. But every time you slip up like this, you think that the problem is lack of control and willpower. So you think, I have to exert even more rigidity, being even harder and stricter and adding more willpower and control to the mix. And this becomes a really vicious cycle, a really vicious circle that tightens over time, because for each round in this extreme level of precision and control and perfectionism, it is followed by equally high levels of fear of failure, of anxiety, and the all or nothing mentality. And then the solid fuck it moment comes. And after a round in this cycle, which I call the diet cycle, the conclusion is to be even more strict, even harder with yourself, and add even more control and rigidity and precision and perfectionism to the process. Also, the hidden cost of this process is that you lose confidence in yourself and in your ability to make your own decisions. And in connection with diet as a solution, many women stop to think for themselves. So there has to be X ounces of chicken and Y grains of rice in the Tupperware. If not, everything is wasted. If I don't get it perfectly, it won't work. But that's an illusion. So the whole diet and fitness industry is only leading women into the diet cycle, trying to pressure their body into changing through adding some kind of rigid and demanding diet to an already full plate. And the diet cycle sets you up for failure through not offering the whole solution, only leaving you miserable, unhappy, losing belief in yourself every time you quote unquote fail and quote unquote falling off the wagon. And adding self-loathing to the negative relationship with your own body, as well as creating a very strained relationship with food. And you end up feeling like an utter failure because of all the times you've tried and all the proof you have that you just can't make it. And nothing creates more stress and exhaustion and frustration and desperation and actually suffering than being sucked into the diet cycle and going deeper and deeper and deeper each round, because every time we fail, we get it confirmed to ourselves that we are a failure. And that is the ultimate pain, because that is equal to the fact that we are not worthy of love and belonging from our peers. So we actually turn into our own worst enemy in trying to use the diet culture and the diet and fitness industry's quote-unquote ways to solve our issues with weight loss and food. Another thing that's important to differentiate in this is that when someone is going into the diet cycle, for every round someone takes in the cycle, the faster they will move through the cycle the next time. Because your brain recognizes being on a diet as something negative because of the level of pressure, rigidity, struggle, and stress. And for every time you try again to go on a diet and your fear of not making it increases, your subconscious brain registers this as suffering, as pain. And just like a child will never touch heated top of the stove several times, this becomes the same mechanism. It's really hard to push ourselves into doing something that we only have experienced suffering in doing. And this is also why it becomes so freaking hard to start again. And you feel like you should do something. You should go on a diet. You should shift things around because you know you want to, but something is just blocking you. And this is it. How our brain works and the fact that you haven't had the whole solution. And there's nothing wrong with you if you have reached the point where it's just so tough thinking about going on a diet, and this makes you feel almost like strangled and paralyzed with fear all at the same time. Because no one would indulge in something where they have only experienced failing and pain and feeling like the utter failure. So there's nothing wrong with you if you have ended up here. You're simply and unfortunately a very big victim for the diet culture, from being the good girl, from patriarchy, and all of the things that we are exposed to in society to keep us in line. And your brain is simply just trying to protect you along the way. And in the meantime, we buy into the idea that it must be me who's the problem, not the system, not the way we are told something is normal or whatever being a normal way to live, not the diet culture, and not the pandemic of self-loathing that happens all around us amongst women today. It's so sad to see and hear how someone will say these simple things that I consider very red flags in these very everyday normal situations, like, oh, I shouldn't take another piece, or I really should choose the salad, or I just can't have it in my house because then I will eat it. All of these things are red flags because they are very clear signs of deeper underlying issues with all of these things we've covered in this podcast. And every time someone goes on a rigid diet and then they fail, all we are left with is being terrified of losing control around food again. Your eating will at some point spiraling out of control because of how your subconscious brain works. You are losing trust in yourself and belief in yourself and feeling good enough and worthy enough, which of course is a very painful place to live. And you end up having a very strained relationship with food and eating. And on top of this, you will develop an even more negative relationship to yourself and your body along the way, because this is what you focus on. It's the one big issue in your life that you just can't seem to get handled and fixed. And yet again, you feel like an utter shameful failure. And these things can be so hard to talk about that we don't actually. So many women come to me and say, oh my God, it's like you're literally sitting inside of my head when you're talking. And I've never told anyone about this. So I guess this is kind of universal then, since you can speak it like that. And I'm like, yeah, sadly it is. But I want you to know this because you aren't alone. And there is another way. But the diet industry, going back on another diet, won't help you. It will only add to the problem, keeping you stuck in the diet cycle. So if you're ready to walk a new path, if you're ready to stop these cycles of suffering, please check out From Pressure to Pleasure and see how it resonates with you. And if you feel the need to talk with me, check in with me, if you have questions, etc., reach out. It's always me in the other end. Thank you for listening today. I'm so grateful for you being here. If you'd like to explore more into these topics, then please hit subscribe. And if you love this podcast, leaving a review or a 5-star rating really helps other women finding it too. And if you know anyone that would benefit greatly from listening to this podcast, then please share it with them. You can find more information about ways to work with me and my free training in the show notes. Thanks for listening to The Diet Riot.